My ultimate goal from setting up this business was to just make sure that OTs have access to good education and that ultimately we provide a better service and provide better care to the clients that we're working with, rather than me being like, they've got other courses that were similar to mine and I won't send them in that direction. That was definitely a concern in the earlier days in terms of this is probably not the smartest business move, but in the end it probably has worked out for the better because those competitors have now actually become my collaborators. We've actually even joined up and created some courses or webinars together, and that's strengthened our position. Instead of feeling that there's not enough work or customers to go around, it's using that as an opportunity to niche down and serve your customers base better.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Healthy Business Lab podcast, where we interview awesome allied health business owners to share their insights, learnings, and experiments so that we can all learn as a part of that process. And today I'm super excited to have Clare Batkin from Your OT Tutor on the episode today with us. Clare, welcome to the episode.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I know there's some cool experiments coming that you've done loads of them, but I'd love for you just to introduce yourself and a bit of your background in the OT space.
Yep. My background is I grew up in a very small country town with about 100 people, went to a school with 5 people in my year 12 class. So when I signed up to do OT, it's kind of process of elimination. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I wanted to work in health, didn't want to do the GP hours and didn't really want to do physio touching people. So OT seemed like the best choice. Fast forward, I got through uni, was then in a hospital OT for a decade or so, where I worked through lots of different areas, mostly with adults. And towards the end of that, I got an opportunity to do more educational clinical education, working with students, and then eventually also working in universities doing sessional academic teaching. And then towards the end of that, COVID hit and we were actually planning to move from New South Wales to Queensland. So we did that move eventually once the borders opened, and I decided I didn't really want to stay in public health and wanted to find a role that would allow me to really focus on clinical education. And at the time, it looked like the NDIS was the way that lots of OT careers were heading. And I thought, well, maybe I can learn how to do that and then help others to do that as well within that role. So I worked for a small company that also did medico-legal work with alongside NDIS. And I found that I was wearing lots of hats in that role. So I was a student coordinator, a new grad program coordinator. I was doing recruitment, social media, plus doing the in-house education for the team. And then what I decided with all the stuff that I was doing, what I really enjoyed was the clinical education. I realized that the only way that I'd be able to do that was, like, as the only thing that I was doing, would be to actually start my own business. In about July 2022, that's when I left that role and started Your OT Tutor. It was a good probably 6 months or so before I actually launched into releasing an online course, and then it was built and snowballed from there.
It's a great summary, having worked myself in public health system and the like. I appreciate that broad breadth of experience that you would have got during that time. I can hear from what you've just shared of the evolution, just been a continuous refinement of, hey, got a bunch of experience, but then how can I really be intentional with what I'm doing and how I'm going about things? Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think so. It was also just looking at what opportunities were actually realistically available in terms of, yes, I've got this unicorn dream role. I suppose that in my head, I would have liked to be working for an employer doing it that way. But the reality is to do those fun things, or what I consider the fun, the education or the non-clinical things, there still needed to be a clinical aspect to my role to actually generate the income to maintain my salary until something took off and we were actually making money from education. In the last few years, there's companies that have been able to find that as a way to add value to their businesses. And there are probably OTs now focusing on those education side of things. But probably a few years ago when I started Your OT Tutor, it wasn't really that common, I suppose, as like a main income generation type thing. And for me to be able to do it, it was like, well, I want to be able to just do this. I probably need to take on the risk or that responsibility for generating the income on my own.
Well, I always like to have a chat about that transition from working for other people and then working for yourselves. And I always, as business owners, often we don't look after ourselves. We sometimes tell other people to do with what we do. What have you leveraged from your OT expertise in helping you navigate and run your own business?
Good point. A lot of sort of my success or how I've been able to keep my business sustainable has been probably a little bit of OT skills and more so maybe just sort of background, personality, growing up, sort of just being determined, self-directed. When you're the only person doing a particular subject in your class, when there's, only 5 in the year 12 class, you kind of get good at finding a way to do things yourself. So I think that was probably, in terms of the sustainability and setting up the business, that was kind of just always been someone that's been self-directed and will just figure things out and get things done. But in terms of the other aspects of my business, or that I brought in OT, I think the big focus really of what I do is teaching others and finding a way to make that a viable business model. But if you're going to do that, then you need to be able to do that education side of things well. So I actually think a lot of my OT skills in terms of being able to educate others has been really helpful for that. So, like for example, when we're working with clients as OTs, we need to be good at delivering the right information in the right time, in the right way, so that people can actually use it to make their health decisions. We think about what do they already know, what's important to them, how's it going to be relevant to them in their day-to-day life. And then we try to frame our education with all that in consideration. I took a lot of those same principles of how to teach our clients into how do I go about teaching OTs. And I think it does go back to a lot of those adult learning type principles. People said I'm quite known for being able to simplify complex topics. So, all those NDIS related topics, to be able to simplify that into things that are practical, step-by-step frameworks that focus on what OTs need to know. Give lots of examples that apply in real life. I think I've drawn on my OT skills, I suppose, to be able to then teach other OTs. And that's probably why, even though kind of was very much an unknown, just any other ordinary OT when I started this, it was my approach to teaching and really drawing on those principles of good education that have probably meant that people, when they do sign up for my courses, they actually take a lot away from it and they sign up again. So that's probably what I'd say from that point of view. But I think because I had that public health background, that really broad experience, that's in some ways been quite an advantage setting up a education company. And I do have lots of NDIS focused education, but it's not all that I teach. And the fact that I do have that experience outside the NDIS actually strengthens my ability to teach the NDIS, because it's really not forgetting about all those core OT skills that I know are relevant across any caseload. We need to have those in place first before we look at the NDIS tips and tricks. And for those maybe educators who just focus on the NDIS tips and tricks, we forget that there's lots of new grads coming into the scheme that don't actually have that benefit of solid OT skills to start with. So, that's probably helped maybe frame a successful approach to the way that I teach others.
What I've written down here off the back of that: frameworks, simplification, and making it relatable, and that being able to tell the story with the real life experience and examples actually makes a massive difference. So that's super useful. That's why I do love talking with OTs alike. It's just so relational, and the observations and being able to go, how do I tailor this for the person over here, the client over here, the team member over here? It's that skill set of being able to piece all those things together in a nice, easy to manage way. So, and that's shone through with what you've talked about there. So now I'd love to transition into the experiments in business in relation to whether it's the delivery models. I know on our first chat we talked a bit of marketing and LinkedIn, so I'd love to dig into that starting process and even evolving an NDIS scores. What are some of the experiments that have stood out for you that you've evolved or learned from over the last few years?
Actually, starting the business as a whole was probably a bit of an experiment. I think there's a lot more OT, allied health educators, consultants, solopreneurs out there now. But when I started back in 2022, there wasn't quite as many of us around. That was just an experiment itself. Is like, can I actually generate enough income to make this a sustainable model? What was on my side was that I had young kids. You might think, well, actually, that's probably not helpful when you got like a 2-year-old and I think a 5 or 6-year-old at the time. But what it had meant was that we'd actually planned for this stage of our life that I wouldn't be having a full-time income, that basically I'd either be working a few hours, casual, part-time, so that I could mostly be a stay-at-home mum. That kind of gave me the luxury where it's like, well, now's as good a time as any to take that risk and not be dependent on having that full-time income coming in, because we'd prepared for that. So that actually worked quite well. And in the end, I don't know what it was, because a lot of the time I was working for this company and thinking, well, that's the safety net. I've got this salary, I can draw on their resources for marketing and things like that. And they were even looking at moving towards trying to generate income from the education side of things. But what I was finding is that all the work from the education side of things was purely me. But if I did it for another company, I'd always sort of be constrained by exactly which direction they wanted to go in, and also all the IP would stay with them. So I thought, before I launch into doing this, I need to make the call now. So I don't even know really why I backed myself to do it, but I did. But luckily that's taken the business as an opportunity to see if it would work actually did take off. But that segues into the next experiment you touched on in terms of social media and LinkedIn.
I love the fact of there was always a thought of sustainability, but also the opportunity arises and preparation, laying the right foundations in place, and again, even the mindset around that. So you go, okay, everything was where it needed to be from a mindset perspective to go, I've got the space, I've got the scope, let's see how this plays out, and which is why I use the experiment word quite a bit. Sounds like, well, let's see how it plays out, and then I'll test measure and see how we go from there. So that's awesome. But then that early phase is the marketing. Again, how do I get people aware of me and what I do, especially at a time when it wasn't the norm in the industry? I'd love for you to share the marketing side of things.
Yeah, like thinking back a few years ago when I first did it, what I did was what most people did. I went on all the platforms, set up accounts on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. I found in that initial stage of 6 to 12 months, that was successful. And what I give advice to other people to do the same is when you're trying to decide on a social media platform, yes, you can be across all areas, but I'd always recommend niching down and really focusing on doing well on one of them, because they all have their own different algorithms. They all work slightly differently. And even though you can post the same content across all the platforms, they're not necessarily going to do equally well across all of them. So I found that the two key things that I needed to decide was, okay, where is my actual audience? So I needed to make sure that whoever I was going to target needed to be on the platform that I was going to focus on, but also which one did I actually enjoy showing up on, that which really aligned with the way that I like to educate, share information. And I found that for me, that was LinkedIn. So not really a fan of Instagram, Facebook. I've got accounts on those, but actually don't doom scroll Instagram for fun. I kind of avoid going on at all costs, really. Whereas LinkedIn, I actually quite enjoy that there's opportunities to share articles and text posts and more networking and learning from others and collaborating. So it's a lot more sustainable when you've got to try and show up regularly if it's something you actually enjoy doing. I actually much rather prefer to write a blog or share an article or do some educational based carousel rather than stand and have B-roll running while I point down the screen at some points that drop out. It's just not the way that I really like to produce content at all. So that was really helpful. But when I was sort of, LinkedIn's the way I'm going to go because I actually enjoy it. I also had to double check, is there an audience there? And for me, I've got a mix of sales. So I do have that B2C. So OTs directly find me, sign up for courses, but I also do have a lot of that B2B where business owners that employ OTs or other allied health actually find me and sign me up to either do training for the teams or they sign up their teams to access my courses. So there was a lot of that B2B. And I think definitely within the LinkedIn, I'm either finding the B2C customers who are a little bit of OT nerds like me that kind of love that education, or the business owners are finding me. So once I decided there's enough of an audience, let's keep rolling with this, I became a bit of a LinkedIn nerd, to be honest, and followed all the gurus, found out what they suggest you should and shouldn't do, what's the algorithm saying. And that has evolved a lot from when I started a few years ago to what it looks like now. The tips and tricks that I used at the start aren't necessarily what works today on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn's probably going through a little bit of a frustrating time for those in terms of when you had a system that worked and now it's all kind of very up in the air, and what used to get views doesn't get views.
I'll jump in on that in as much as I love the acknowledgement, because as people, we get a system, we get a framework and it's working and all alike, but as long as we still continue to think of it as the experiment, because is it still working or not, especially when we are engaging with algorithms? Because I think what you've touched on there is how we got connected via LinkedIn. It's a great space in the allied health industry because you're lifelong learners, which leads to this point of can continue learning about the platform as well as the network as you go. We love to set and forget if we can from the business side of things, because it's like, I just want to deliver. I just want to do the fun stuff and help my people. But from the conversations we need to have and what we need to keep on top of. So really appreciate you sharing that part of it, but I'll let you keep on going there now.
Besides the fact that it's always changing, you need to stay on top of that. What I have done, is grown my audience to about 18,000 followers on LinkedIn now. I've just cracked that the other week, but it's probably more so the networking and just the opportunity to learn about what other OTs are out there, which I found really valuable and led to another experiment, which is the whole, do you collaborate with other OTs doing similar things or are they your competition? And I think in other sectors, it's probably very much don't help out or try and work with the enemy or the people that are directly trying to sign up people to also do OT education. I took the opposite approach and do collaboration, but there's been lots of value that have has come from that. So being able to learn that even though there's OTs doing similar things to me, they're often doing a slightly different way or a slightly different focus. So if somebody comes to me and is like, do you have a course on this? I can be like, no, I don't, but I know another OT company that does. So I'm always still able to help people. And my ultimate goal from setting up this business was to just make sure that OTs have access to good education, and that ultimately we provide a better service and provide better care to the clients that we're working with. So rather than me being like, oh, they've got other courses that were similar to mine and I won't send them in that direction, that was definitely a concern in the earlier days in terms of this is probably not the smartest business move, but in the end it probably has worked out for the better because those competitors have now actually become my collaborators. We've actually even joined up and created some courses or webinars together, and that's actually strengthened our position instead of feeling that, there's not enough work or customers to go around. It's actually using that as an opportunity to really niche down and serve your customer base better.
We've got a lot of alignment in how we think and what we do. I love a good collaboration. So I'd love to hear what a collaboration experiment looks like for you. How does it evolve from somebody's doing something interesting, I can see an opportunity where we could do something, into giving something a go and then reviewing that process and having a new one come up or deepening those collaborations? What's your approach to that process?
Sometimes it's a bit of both. So often it does start on LinkedIn. It's either somebody posts something I think, oh, that's interesting for OTs to know about. I don't know about much, and I know a lot of just random OT stuff. Yeah. So it's new to me. I'm like, it's probably going to be helpful to OTs out there. And I'm even more interested if it's an issue. So other people working with OTs have found that OTs aren't doing something well or that they don't understand something. Then I'm like, well, I've got a good audience base now. How can I get that information out there? So I'm actually currently in the process of doing a collaboration at the moment where someone started commenting on my post and I reached out, what are you doing? And they provide a bit of a consultancy service for OTs in terms of working with a very specific niche area. So it's like when we're trying to recommend someone has an assistance animal, there's this person that actually helps provide advice on that and has found OTs were having difficulty with doing things not right. Instead of helping people one-on-one, how can I spread the word? So I'm like, well, that's something I don't know about, but I'd like to be able to help OTs to make good recommendations. The collaboration is this going to be beneficial for both of us? Because I've never expects people to put together content that's going to be for free or helping other OTs unless there's going to be some benefit for them as well, because otherwise their business isn't sustainable. So we worked out that by creating just a bit of a FAQs sheet based on the issues that she was finding that OTs were having, the questions she was getting, that could actually replace a lot of the freebie inquiry calls that she was, instead of keeping to 15 minutes, she was expanding out to 40 minutes and not charging people for. We could create this, work together, and then I could also put it on my platform. I get the added benefit of being able to provide a greater variety of information to OTs so more people can find me, find out what else I can do. But ultimately, the end result of this hopefully will be if OTs learn a bit more from this person that I'm working with and I spread the word, then the clients are going to have better outcomes, because that was her whole motivation for wanting to do this. Some of the recommendations we were working weren't holding up long term, and we wanted to think, well, what can we do about this? So that's a bit of an example of how it works. Sometimes they reach out to me, sometimes I reach out to them. And we just always think about how is it going to be mutually beneficial for both of us, and then also making sure it aligns with our values, which is almost always coming back to how does this help our clients.
Yeah, love it. And how do we add value for yourself, for the collaborators, but at the end point, what's the win-win-win at the end of the day? And so then are you reviewing that process and going, okay, going back with the collaborator, I did this work, what's next? And is that just then become a bit of a cycle and different collaborators over different things or timeframes, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it just usually starts as a one-off, what's the goal that we can work towards, and then definitely does snowball from there. So another example is I did some collaborations with an advocacy groups that helps people with a particular condition, and started off again similar, just providing my expertise about how to do functional capacity assessments. Didn't really know anything about the condition at all, but started off learning that. Did a resource, was a guest, did a webinar, and now I'm like a part of their team to try and expand their education services out even further. So it's always looking at, was that actually beneficial? And the point was, if the first resource wasn't helpful, the webinar flopped, then we were like, well, maybe this isn't actually the best collaboration. But, on their YouTube channel that's had over 1,000 views, that webinar that we did, compared to a couple of hundred or something like that on their other one. So we know that there's definitely interest in it. So that's why we're going to take it a bit further.
It's kind of the idea of, hey, a collaboration doesn't have to be a real big thing initially. It can just be, hey, let's test the waters with this or that, which in both those examples that you've shared, you've shown that what's a quick win that we can provide. Are we providing value? What's the outcome? I love you unpacking a couple of examples there of how you've approached that. In our episodes, we love to talk about transformations that we've seen, whether it's for end clients, team members, in your case, some of the educational outcomes that you've seen and people transforming what they do and how they do. What comes to mind when you think transformations that you've seen with what you've done there in your business?
Probably a few different examples. Like one of the trade-offs of having like a business that's purely, well, mostly based on online courses. That's probably what my main revenue is. Or I don't really get to see the full transformation. I get maybe the little snippets in the evaluation forms that say, yes, this has boosted my confidence, or yes, I can take these referrals now, or this has made so much sense where previously it hasn't. So you can see that there's the potential for transformation, but you don't often get to follow it through. Part of the work I do, besides some online courses, I do work one-on-one with people. I do have some CPD memberships for OT where I do get a little bit more of that touch point and that one-on-one time and get to see people maybe longer term over their journey. One example is there was an experienced OT, wanted to get into the NDIS space, wanted to just focus on doing those one-off functional capacity assessments and reports because that fitted in with her. It was a new mum, wanted to try and make that as flexible as possible in the contracting role she was doing, but didn't really have any idea of how to do FCA. She had experience in other areas, not within the NDIS. So a lot of the way that I teach others is focused on not just about learning one-on-one. It's not just about self-directed learning, but it's about how that all comes together and making sure that it's suitable for people at the time when they need it. So we worked through, she started with the courses to do the self-directed learning. Then we did some one-on-one supervision sessions together. And she moved into actually writing the reports. I was able to do review and written feedback. And then it's like clinical knowledge and support writing styles, that information was more set and she was more confident in that. It was looking at, okay, the bigger decisions of which referrals are actually appropriate for me. How do I take on some of these trickier ones when there's all these other extra elements that make those a little bit trickier as well? Eventually, it's not she's calling on me to help her all the time, but she's actually over the years weaned off needing my help, which to me is actually the sign that I've done my job well, is when she's not reliant on needing me to provide that support. So that's probably the main thing I always look at is has someone's confidence grown so that they're not as reliant on me. And because I was able to review her work and know that the quality of the work that she was doing was really high level and that the clients were going to get those good outcomes.
And I think it's that idea of confidence is transformative. And being able to help people get to a point where they're confident enough to step into their own brilliance and expertise, then as a coach or a consultant or a trainer or an educator, that is the ultimate reward. That's what I love seeing over the end of the day. If people can go off and use a framework and we've simplified things, then they can go off and do that. The ripple effects, the work that this OT is doing, and how many people, community she's impacting from her work is absolutely brilliant, which is what this podcast is all about, sharing those stories because we want more awesome allied health practitioners, business owners out there in the world doing this amazing work and building sustainability, which you've touched upon a number of times. So I really appreciate your shares today, Claire. That has been absolutely brilliant.
I think for those thinking, well, could I be a solopreneur as well? I think a lot of the time the driving factor is, well, I could help one-on-one a certain amount of clients, but there's a limit on that. If I can actually teach others to provide better services, then there's not really any limit in terms of how many people you can actually support and provide better outcomes for. So it's always worth the experiment, worth a try, and be savvy about it. Don't just wing it because things are likely to fall apart. You do need to have systems and planning, but sometimes it's okay to trust your gut to take a few risks, and it can be really worth the payoff.
I couldn't have summarised that any better myself. And to round off, and we've already touched on it a little bit, but if you just want to share the best place for people to find you across LinkedIn and other avenues, we'll make sure we share all the details in the show notes.
Yeah, the easiest way to connect with me, if you are on LinkedIn, just find me, Clare Batkin. I don't think there's too many of us on there. Find me, send me a connection request, and I will definitely connect with you there. I do have a YouTube channel that's just called Your OT Tutor, and you can find me there. And otherwise, the website is iott.au. So we'll share all that for you, but lots of ways that you can find me. And if you do reach out to me, it is literally just me. So I wear all the hats. I am the marketing person, the media person, the tech person. So if you reach out and send me a message, it will 100% be me responding to you, not a VA, not an AI. Maybe I'm behind the times, but that authenticity is really important to me. So definitely do reach out and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
And that's 100% how Claire and I got connected in the first place and started some great conversations. So that's a wrap here from the Healthy Business Lab podcast for this episode. And make sure you like, subscribe so you can learn many more gold nuggets just like Claire's been sharing today. Once again, Claire, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Healthy Business Lab podcast. Make sure you subscribe to keep up to date with all the latest episodes.